Lawyers of Reddit. What was your hardest client to defend in court? Had a woman charged with violating a no contact order. The order said that she wasn't to come within 100 yards of her ex's house. Cops pull up to ex's house and she's standing in the front yard, waving her arms and screaming. I was racking my brain for something to argue to the jury as a reason to find her not guilty. Didn't really come up with much, Your Honor. My client has a deranged identical twin. That simply was not her. Lawyer here. I don't normally do litigation, but as a pro bono project, and for some experience doing a different kind of law, I served as guardian ad litem for these two kids stuck in a high conflict child custody dispute. Guardian ad litem basically means that the court appointed me to represent the kids whose parents are fighting over them. This is oversimplifying slightly. In other words, I didn't represent either parent, but both parents wanted me on their side since my opinion of the case would be influential with the judge. It was a complete show. Both parents were very low income, basically living off of various forms of government assistance. Each had several other kids with other partners. The mom said that the dad sold drugs. The dad said that the mom is a prostitute who neglected the kids. And there were various reports from the kids' school that corroborated this. One of the kids, the sister, was super cute, but the other, the brother, called his sister a hoe in open court and said he hated her. Luckily the parents agreed to a joint custody arrangement before it went to trial. This experience confirmed for me 1000% that I do not want to be a litigator, especially in family court. What a mess. Not a lawyer here, but my dad was. One of his hardest cases was a day I had to go to work with him. The judge was very understanding. He gave me a legal pad to take notes. I was maybe 3 and couldn't read or write, but I took the pad and pen he gave me, and I copied what everyone else was doing. All it was squiggles and dots. But hey, I took notes. After he heard the argument, the judge took my notepad back and checked my notes. He played along, told me they were excellent notes. He then told me that I did good, and asked me if I thought my dad had a better argument. I said yes because he's my dad. My dad lost the case because the answer was blatant, but still best memory ever. Side note, he was an environmental lawyer. The case was about a house being built near a wetland and the distance of it and the power used. He lost, but hey, it worked. Client was a nurse who had administered a fatal injection. Killed a baby. It was a long story. TLDR. I got her off any charges of negligence many years ago, but this case will stay with me forever. After hours. Small rural hospital. Understaffed and under-equipped. Pediatric ward. Baby very ill with gastroenteritis and hadn't responded to weeks of treatment. Was losing weight despite everything. There was no doctor on the pediatric ward that night, or, in fact, in the entire hospital. When the lab phoned the baby's blood work results into the nurse on duty and said the baby was going to die soon if he didn't receive urgent treatment, nurse phoned the doctor on telephonic call, who wasn't supposed to go in, having already worked long hours that day. Just be available for phone calls, and the doc gave instructions for a sister to give an ampoule of potassium chloride. She wrote down the instruction. The doc didn't specify that it be given orally, which was what was meant. But because the doc specified that a sister must give it, she assumed it should be an injection as she herself wasn't qualified to give injections, but a nursing sister is. The nurse called the sister from the maternity ward to carry out the instruction, explained the urgency. The sister was very busy in the maternity ward but came to the pediatric ward and gave the injection. Baby passed away from immediate cardiac arrest. The partners in the firm didn't want to touch the case as they thought it was impossible. But in our law, negligence has a specific definition. I won the case for the nursing sister by arguing that my client was trying her best, with only the instructions and resources at hand, under circumstances where she had been told the patient would die very soon if the treatment wasn't given. She was an amazingly dedicated person and what happened had completely devastated her. She wanted to quit nursing. I hope she changed her mind after that. Afterward, the one good thing that came out of this tragic event was that I mentioned to local Rotary Club member that the hospital in question desperately needed some telemedicine equipment, knowing that the club had such a project, and shortly after that they were able to make a donation of equipment to the hospital. I even coincidentally saw that doctor in passing years afterwards and the doctor was so grateful for that equipment. A 16-year-old kid who committed robbery and sexual abuse. He had zero remorse. Have a neighbor who was part of defense team for a high profile case where person was clearly guilty. Said at that point, it's just about getting them a fair trial, negotiating conditions of confinement, max medium in security, proximity of prison to family, etc. One of my clients stabbed a McDonald's employee through the drive-through window, and when he was arrested they found 4 grams of powdered morphine in his sock. A client once told me all about his big fall in a supermarket. Did all I could to make clear that the client was traumatized because the supermarket didn't clean the damn floor. Lo and behold, the supermarket showed a recording of the client setting up his fall by opening a bottle himself and pouring all around the corridor. I just dropped the case right there and let him to figure out how to pay for the legal expenses. So, there it goes. My most impossible to defend client, as, of course, I didn't even try after that point. I do family law. My hardest clients are the ones that low-key alienate their children from an ex over personal feelings. They don't see at all why the behavior is a problem, and they are usually very unlikable people. Don't get me wrong. I have repped bad people who still manage to be likable, but not these walnuts. My friend always has to defend people that shoplift at Walmart. For some reason they think they can get out of it even though there is clear video showing them stealing and getting apprehended with the stolen merchandise. I've been a lawyer for almost a year now, so this was one of my first cases. My father-in-law asked me to help a friend of his who was having trouble with his driver license. Turns out he had the license revoked because he passed a red light. Went to talk with the guy. He told me that wasn't him using the vehicle and that didn't received any notifications. I went to the transit department to get the files of the ticket, and man, it was clear as day that was him in the vehicle. I mean, he was in fact wearing the same shirt of his driver license picture. Lol. I was almost giving up. Told him he could apply for a new driver license and wasn't a big deal. But he confessed to me that he actually had bought that license, paid lots of money and couldn't afford a new one. He is a good driver, but he almost can't read, so he couldn't pass the writing test. As you may know, I had a legal obligation of keep his secret. Anyway, here in my country, in order to respect the due process of law, transit department needs to send 2 notifications to a person. One about the ticket and other about the punishment. We managed to prove that they didn't send the notifications, so he couldn't defend himself. Therefore, the process is invalid. I didn't get into the subject of whether or not he was driving though. Now he is happily driving and my father-in-law is proud of me. Got a DUI client who had kicked his trial date down by almost 2 years. Had a history of DUI but had cleaned up his act until this one. His story: he was sitting in his car waiting for a ride when he got picked up. No keys in the ignition. Talked to the cops by opening the door. No way he could have hoped to drive the thing. Cops story: keys were in the ignition and window was down. No one disputing that he was faced. His case was winnable, but for one thing, he couldn't lay his damn trap shut on the stand. If I asked him the time, he told me where his watch was made and what the name of the clerk was who sold it to him. Classic mouth diarrhea sufferer. His friends were his other witnesses, and I couldn't have asked for better ones. The police were the prosecutor's witnesses, and I poked holes in their testimony left and right. The case was far from an airtight acquittal, but I had more than enough reasonable doubt to win. Doubt except for my client, who revealed on the stand that it was his 4th DUI when, as far as anyone on the jury was concerned, it was his first. Then he couldn't keep his story straight on how he talked to the cop opening the window vs cracking the door. Makes a difference because the key would have had to be in the ignition for the windows to roll down, and if I tried to rein him in, he went off on another tangent. And this was all after refusing to plead to a stipulated first offense, which would have been fines and traffic school instead. He torpedoed his own case, got convicted, got something like 60 days in jail and a ton of costs, and I got frustratingly close to a win. Workplace accident caused the death of a worker. I represented the company, defending against charges of negligence, various health and safety violations. The owner clearly didn't take safety seriously and constantly complained about was how this was hurting his business. I'm never gonna financially recover from this. So many, but he was a man in and out of prison and with clear mental illness and aggression issues. He was very threatening, rude, and psychotic. I can't give details but use your imagination. Anyway, during his trial, He appeared by telephone. Use your imagination. Why? When the opposing counsel began to give his opening speech, my client began screaming that the lawyer is a liar. Liar. Total bullshit, etc. I'm telling my client to let the attorney finish and we'll have our time later. The client screams at me that if I can't correct the lies, he'll have to do it himself. I tell him there's a procedure and we can correct any lies when it's our turn. He pipes down. The other lawyer continues. My client is snickering angry remarks under his breath, like effing bullshit, etc. He then starts to scream at the other lawyer. The judge quiets him down, but now he's yelling at the judge and shit's getting real. I'm telling my client to listen to the judge and not talk over him. Client finally ends his screaming. We barely finish. More snarky interruptions from my client ensue until the judge says that if I cannot control my client, yes, like a toddler, that he'd lose the right to talk for the remainder of the trial. Somehow my client makes it through without screaming, and whenever he is close to yelling, I have to calm him down like MRX. Don't worry, we'll have our turn. The judge is pissed because what should have taken an hour took 2.5. Then he says, any final remarks? And I kid you not, my client addresses me and is like, am I allowed to say that if the judge doesn't side with me, I'm going to? I cut him off immediately, and was like, no, unless there was any evidence missing, there's nothing more. Till this day I'm not sure what he was going to say, but based on a prior conversation where he said he'd bash someone's head in if they got in the way of his goals on the streets, I suspect it may have been threatening. Anyway, we lost the trial. Many weeks later, I heard that people from several rooms away heard my client screaming during his trial. P.S. With many exceptions, lawyers are underpaid for the BS we have to deal with. We're basically typewriters, babysitters, researchers, editors, therapists, counselors, middlemen, advocates, actors and officers of the court, all in one. We get a lot of hate, and there are some true a-holes, but many of us are dealing with society's biggest drama. I was a baby lawyer in my first year representing the 19-year-old child of some rich people in San Mateo County, CA. My client had gone on a bit of a shoplifting spree and we were cleaning all her cases up with a global plea, meaning we handled them all at once. Being new, I filled out the plea form wrong, swapping the counts she was charged with for the counts she was pleading to. It's an easy mistake to make. Every court has their own unique form and I was unfamiliar with San Mateo's. The judge calls my line, starts reading off the plea form, notices the mistake and then starts screaming at the top of his lungs, counsel, what is this? What is this? Is this your first day on the job? This is a court of law and we do not accept mistakes. Fill this plea form out correctly or I will have you taken into custody for contempt. I did not expect a reaction like that. My client, who had clearly just taken a huge bong rip at 8 AM and who was wearing an all pink velvet tracksuit, was looking at me like I was the biggest idiot in the world. I corrected the plea form. The judge made me wait until the very end of the calendar to take my plea. Afterward, he called me up to the bench. In private he told me, sorry to ream you like that. Everyone messes the plea form up, so I always pick the youngest lawyer to yell at. The older guys will grumble and complain. But if you noticed, they all fixed their own forms and we didn't have any more problems. Keeps the calendar running smooth. Where did you go to law school? After that he invited me into his office for coffee and gave me some really good life work advice. Turns out he likes talking to new lawyers.